Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more early access Path of Exile 2 talk. With more news dropping this week after embargoes lifted for ours and other creators' time with the game, interviews in the streams and videos even put out by GGG themselves, we have a lot more to talk about and digest, and there was a fantastic interview I want to highlight with DM and Gazi. This was held with Jonathan Rogers in a kind of podcast style, filled with ideal questions and insanely open answers. Jonathan said during it that maybe he shouldn't say this or that, but he just does anyway. So I'd really recommend the videos put out by Gazi and DM about it. And they're both going to be good creators to follow for PoE 2 in general, so please go check them out. I'm not going to be referencing, say, even 20% of everything covered in those videos. But either way, that interview and lots of other information coming out has answered quite a few questions that we have about this early access and the game at large. Like for example, I stated in my all classes video that we've only actually been shown druid with bear form, but I'm sure it has more, but what and how many? Well, Jonathan confirmed in that talk that the druid will actually have 3 primary forms, which is kind of what we were looking to know as a great example. So here's just a pile of interesting or useful things to know with the big ongoing reveals this week. Let's start with some general things to know, and then we'll jump through a bunch of the things I thought were great to hear from the interview. Firstly, when is the early access going live? Well, it turns out it's going live at 11 AM PST on December 6th. So for myself in the UK, that means it's going live at 7 PM, fairly late that day. Now, in terms of early access and the league they're doing for that, that means a couple special things. It's planned to last at least 6 months for the period that it's running, but based on how things have gone, with releasing the game and all that, I would say it could be noticeably longer than that, but at least 6 months is the current plan. Interestingly, we will get to keep these early access characters in the future though, but maybe not in the way you might have hoped. There's the standard league, which is kind of the permanent and default league. If you're coming from Diablo 4, you'd view the standard league similar to, say, the Eternal Realm. However, these early access characters are never going to be part of the standard league. According to Jonathan, early access characters will stay in an early access league that will still be accessible after launch, but will be separate from standard. On that note, the official webpage for early access is here and updated, full of specific information you might want to check out, whether that's lore, stuff about the 6 classes and their ascendancies, information about, say, the new skill gem system, the passive tree, the dual spec stuff, equipment examples are there, various endgame references, and it's all pretty easy to take a look at and get a good understanding of stuff very quickly. Now, one thing in regards to those classes though, is that we finally get a proper look at the new class selection screen, which to be fair was teased I think about 5 years ago now originally, when PoE 2 was first announced. So it's pretty cool to see that still there after all this time, with the general footage in the trailer. But it's a pretty brutal way to introduce your character. You're basically choosing who's going to survive the hanging, just one, or in a darker light, who's gonna die. If you guys want to learn all the specific details we've seen for all the classes and their ascendancies so far though, I want to recommend this Reddit post by Selva Paluda. They took the time to write out every reveal and bit of information shown for these, so I think it's great to refer to if you want. Now, during the big early access livestream, we learned what's coming for this initial version. As you can see, we have Acts 1 to 3 are going to be available immediately, but then we're going to have to replay those again on a harder difficulty called Cruel. It will just make things harder, but is ultimately a filler concept just for now. They plan to release Acts 4 to 6 eventually, but because they wanted Endgame to be more buffed out and ready for early access, that's what they chose to work on instead. So they expect us to reach about level 65 to begin their Endgame systems, which would be at the end of completing Act 3 a second time, but on Cruel. But when the game's fully out or whenever they get it out, this would instead just be at the end of Act 6. Beyond that, insanely, we can expect a pretty big endgame in the immediate early access from level 65 to 100, which, as you might imagine, is going to be an insane amount of content to engage with immediately. From everything they highlighted in the early access stream, the endgame seems pretty varied and fleshed out to begin. We have the atlas, the random maps, and a massive pile of themes with a huge roster of encounters. During that, you'll find different bits of endgame that will actually be inspired from various leagues that they ran in PoE 1. So you might encounter something like a breach. It's going to be a hand that opens a tear in reality when you interact with it, and it'll spew out these hordes of demons, as well as having specific rewards for doing it, and also a breach-specific boss encounter does exist. Another mechanic you might find is delirium, where you find a kind of mirror and you touch it and spread mist. You stay within that mist to maintain the nightmare that's going on, where you're killing more and more monsters for more rewards. But if you overstay your welcome, you're going to regret it because the monsters get stronger the longer you hold the miss. Another one is the rituals. You'll start and defeat enemies attached to it, and that will feed the altar. When you activate the ritual, that revives them, so you have to kill them again. And then there's multiple ritual sites, so each one you go to, you revive all of the monsters you killed so far, making it harder and harder and more risky. But you keep building up more resource called tribute, which can be spent on rewards later. Similar in a way to expeditions, as they were also shown, where you're hunting relics by explosively digging them up, challenged by the restless dead that you're very much waking up. Here you'll also find remnants, which when exploded give you massive bonuses to the expedition, at the cost of a nasty power-up for the enemies. So you need to be careful to pick and choose what you activate to make this expedition worth more, because the cost of what you're going to give to the enemies could be too much for you to handle. So those are just a few examples, but what's really cool about all of that is that each of these has its own skill tree that you can modify the experience with to make some things harder but increase specific rewards based on what you want. So pretty cool stuff, but on the note of the Atlas maps, let's start referencing some details from the interview. As Jonathan explained, you can only die once in a map or it's lost, but you'll have 6 portals to make 6 trips total back to your stash to kind of recoup. Generally, people seem pretty positive about this tougher rule, that there's actually going to be consequences to dying in that context. My favourite take about this is how it adds challenge for a softcore character without actually deleting your character, such as having a hardcore character. And, as Jonathan said, maps being something you can fail means they can also make them more rewarding, allowing them to kind of rebalance it. And I much prefer this concept than, say, dying but then progressing a little, then dying, then progressing a little, still getting the rewards. This feels like a better system. But also in regards to the endgame, Jonathan explained that the crafting bench was apparently cut, at least for now. We've heard something about this before, so it's not exactly new news, but it is something that he wanted to state, I guess, for this early access, that that's indeed a thing. He suggests it might return as an endgame system, but for now, there was too many design problems with it. It's my understanding that they want us to get more from drops, rather than from specific crafting anyway, so yeah, we'll see how it works out. On top of that, during the stream, strong boxes were shown as painfully slow to engage with. So much so that I've seen people discuss how they're planning to skip these and never use them already. Thankfully, he said that with the strongbox openings being shown in that way, it's going to be much faster than we saw, which is a smart choice and all. But for me, the main thing there is it's great to see how they're so aware about that type of response and then instantly dealing with it. Moving on to the topic of classes, Jonathan said in that talk, the next 2 classes coming to the early access are going to be druid and huntress. And he says they'll be relatively soon. Now, obviously, we have no clue what relatively soon really means, but it just means that those are the next 2 to look forward to. On that note, as I mentioned in the intro, if you missed it, he also said that druid's going to have 3 primary forms rather than just what we've seen so far, which was, the human and then the bear form. It's not a surprise to hear there's going to be more than 1 special form, but it's good to have that confirmation. And what classes we're going to get next in the form of druid and huntress in general. It makes sense because we've actually seen a reasonable amount of, say, druid and huntress, but the ones that I would expect to wait the longest for would be the 4 we've not been shown much of at all. So that's marauder, shadow, duelist, and templar. That's my assumption for the ones you're going to have to wait the longest for. Now, in regards to our ascendancy options, you'll know that you have a unique skill tree for the subclass that you picked. You earn it by doing that first ascend right, and then further trials get you more ascend points to work with to put into that new tree. It was confirmed in this talk with Jonathan that we're going to have 8 ascendancy points to work with, big picture, so pretty familiar. That might help you though, because you could take a look at the trees they've shown and get an idea or make a plan of how many points you're going to spend where. Though obviously that's going to be more relevant when we can really look at what's going on with those skill trees. Other ascend related things mentioned would be, say, for the warrior subclass, Warbringer. The special Jade Heritage ability is more controllable than we were shown. The one where you turn into the Jade statue, it begins to build up stacks of Jade to begin mitigating damage. It turns out you can cancel it early and manage that how you want, which is a nice bit of detail. While for, say, the sorcerer subclass, Chronomancer, the ultimate command ability, which pauses time around you, he confirmed that that time stop will not freeze your friends, so it just seems the enemies near you will be affected. Both of these details are logical and all, but it's good to have that cleared up. Other quick nice confirmations during this talk were things like how loot filters are going to be supported once again. Not a big surprise, but good to have confirmation. Or another one, how an in-game build planner is actually in the works. Normally in a game like this, I'd expect to be using third-party tools for that purpose, but it does sound nice to have a chance to do it in-game when it's eventually here. Another one would be how there's planned support to allow for quick swapping between, say, PC UI to controller UI when you're on keyboard or swapping to a controller, but unfortunately, that's not going to be there at the launch of Early Access. It'll be coming later. I've never actually properly played an ARPG on a controller other than bits of Diablo 4. I always find the gameplay part really nice, it feels good, but say using inventory and any UI stuff, I find that much more slow and clunky and annoying, but I'm sure I'll still give it a try, at least to see how it works. Oh, and lastly, it was said that there will be more teasers leading up to the Early Access launch, so we can expect even more information and stuff to look at, even in the coming days before we get playing. But yeah, I'll leave it there for today. That's just a pile of stuff that I've learned since the first Early Access livestream day and things that I thought would be worth talking about. If there's anything you guys would like to add to these topics, then you can feel free to share it in the comments. But there's a ton more we're going to be talking about in the coming days before we finally get to play. Until next time then, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.